thank you much, Elise. And everybody for coming. It's not a polar vortex, so I guess it's not so hard to come out tonight. This is my last hurrah. Maybe it's my last hurrah, but my last hurrah on this tour. I've been traveling for 3.5 weeks, beginning in LA, and talking about the one-state solution. That's what we've been really working on, is the idea of one single democratic state. But tonight I'm going to talk about something else, and I have a book, I think, for sale in the back, if Will has come. Will is back there. All right. And it's a book, it's called War Against the People. And I guess, maybe I can start this way. I've been an activist for many years in Israel. I'm getting in front of bulldozers, because I'm the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, fighting the occupation. And over the years, as I've been on the ground, getting kicked by Israeli soldiers and this and that, the question in the back of my mind, kind of nagging me in the back of my mind, was always, how does Israel get away with this? Here we have a conflict, one of the major conflicts in the world, disrupts the entire Middle East. It's happening on the southern border of Europe, in the light of day. It's not happening in the faraway mountains somewhere. In the Holy Land, no less, just to give it an added twist, supported by the United States and Europe, involving major weapon systems, with a degree of violence, especially over Gaza, for example, and occasional wars, that are major wars really in any context. And yet, Israel is an occupying power of the last 50 years, and yet the Israeli status in the international community gets better and better all the time. Every successive president loves Israel more, gives more money to Israel. Now we're up to $38 billion over a 10-year period for arms from the United States. And internationally, Israel's reputation gets better and better. Just a few years ago, Israel was voted in to the OECD, which is the club of the exclusive advanced economies of the world. At that time, there were 25 members. To become a member, not only did you have to have a certain level of economic development and stability, but you had to adhere to human rights standards and to international law. To get into the OECD, it has to be a unanimous vote among the 25 most advanced economies in the world. And Israel was voted in. With an occupation, with everything else we're talking about, was voted in, even by countries like Norway and Ireland that are otherwise, very critical of Israel. So one question is why? That's one question. Another question is, we have here the map of what we call the two-state solution. That was a solution for many years to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as it's called. And it's obviously a very pro-Israeli solution. And this is the political solution supported by the United States, the international community, in which Israel is on 78% of historic Palestine, even though the Jews today are a minority in this country, and the Palestinians, the indigenous majority population, are confined to, or would have gotten, maybe, under this idea, a little state on 22% of their historic homeland. The West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. So, in 1988, the PLO under Arafat officially recognized Israel in these borders and said to Israel, we will normalize relations with you, us and the entire Arab world and everybody else, if you give up the occupation. Now you would expect Israel to grab that opportunity. Whoa, we're a minority population, and yet we could get 78% of the country, and peace, and security, and the recognition of the entire Arab world. If we give up, all right, we give up Tulkarm, we give up Jericho, we give up Hebron, for not much of a price, Gaza, we could have peace, security, and 78% of the country 30 years ago. Can you imagine if this had been resolved 30 years ago, how that might have impacted on the Middle East of today? Why didn't Israel grab that opportunity? Well, these are all kinds of questions that are hard to answer unless you understand what I call Israel's security politics. And that is that we have to look at the West Bank and Gaza, the Palestinian areas, as a resource, not as a threat, not as an occupied territory, because Israel denies it's an occupied territory, but rather as a place where you can, and it's harsh to say this, but it's true, where you can test and develop weapons for a kind of a war that I call war against the people, that is then for exporting. And I want to go back and I want to explain what that means, and then I think we'll begin to understand why Israel isn't interested in giving up the occupied territories, that resource, and why Israel gets away with it in the world. So I put actually the Israeli, all right, so look, I'm looking, in other words, what we were doing always was looking down at Israel and the occupation. So to answer these questions, I said to myself, what if I looked up at Israel's place in the world? And if you look up, all of a sudden a whole different kind of a picture begins to emerge of this little country called Israel, a country the size of Connecticut. And Israel, it turns out, becomes a major arms and security power in the world. So what you can do, this is only a partial map, what you can do is explain Israel's relations to virtually every single country in the world, including countries it does not have diplomatic relations with. And there's technologies, but especially police technologies, what I call technologies of repression, surveillance systems, different kinds of security systems. It isn't only military. And you look at the map, and we're used to thinking of Israel as a client state of the U.S. And certainly there's a lot of relationships, and you love Israel, you Americans. I mean, Israel's your best ally in the Middle East, and we share values. And every 2 weeks you have an Israeli prime minister addressing Congress, and Israel, Israel, Israel. Well, you look at the map, and some interesting things emerge from this security politics. Israel is not in your basket. Or how would you say, all Israel's eggs are not in the American basket, by any means. Look, turns out Israel is the number 2 arms supplier to China. Whoa. I mean, China is the arch enemy of the United States. The United States is moving the entire 6th Fleet into the South Pacific to contain China. John Bolton, one of your stellar diplomats, was in Israel a couple weeks ago. And he said, and I'm serious, he said this, if Trump ever found out how close Israel is to China, he'd be very upset. Fortunately, he's not going to find out. But, so in other words, here's Israel as the number 2 arms supplier to China after Russia, and what makes it more impressive is that Israel's not selling big, expensive equipment. jet airplanes and ships and missiles and tanks, that would account for that volume of business. It's selling components of weapon systems, surveillance systems, so that if Israel can be the #2 arms supplier to China with the largest army in the world, and it's only selling smaller things, it gives you the idea of how deep the penetration is of Israel into not only the military in China, but into the security services and the police and other realms. Israel, it turns out, is it depends on the year, 2, 3, 4 largest arms supplier to India. These are 2 of the largest militaries in the world. Plus, all kinds of things. Now with Bolsonaro in Brazil, Israel has agreed to send drones to the police forces, not to the army, with facial recognition systems, weaponized drones for the pacification of the favelas, and in Bolsonaro's regime, pacification of everybody, I'm sure. And you can go all over the world. Look, 25% of Israel's arms deals are with Sub-Saharan Africa. Europe, of course, is very important. Canada. The point I'm trying to make is that Israel, you can look at Israel in every single country and document exactly how it helps the elites in that country and the governments in that country repress and control their populations, including, of course, one of the most dramatic cases is Saudi Arabia. And the Khashoggi family, the journalist who was killed in Istanbul, his family is suing Israel and an Israeli security firm for selling the eavesdropping equipment to the Saudi government with which they caught the journalists. So that Israel is, Sisi in Egypt has just said last week that, how deep the Israeli involvement is in the security of Egypt. So you can go country by country. Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Myanmar, there's a worldwide boycott of weaponry, a UN boycott of weapons to Myanmar, and Israel is the only country that is bypassing that boycott. Israel has 2 military bases, one off Eritrea, both in Muslim countries. One off Eritrea, but the most important one in Azerbaijan. And this is where Israel launches its rockets into space, for satellites and so on. And that's significant because this is the jumping off point to Iran. You see? Now, I would even go so far as to say, and I'm being provocative and maybe overstating the case, that in many ways Israel has a greater global reach than the United States. Now, that seems crazy. The Pentagon's budget is $1 trillion a year. You have bases in 174 countries out of 193. How could that be? Well, the American presence is a military one. You've got bases all over, but they're fairly closed areas, kind of McDonald's land. You eat McDonald's and then you fly your airplanes out somewhere. And their impact on a society is fairly shallow, fairly limited. Whereas Israel doesn't have bases. It has those 2. It doesn't have bases, but Israel works not only with your military, it works primarily with your security services, your presidential guards, your internal domestic security, homeland security, and your police forces. You see, and with your corporations. So in a way, in almost every country, the Israeli penetration deep into the security realms of a country is much deeper than that in the United States. So Israel really is a presence to be dealt with, but there's another level to all this too. This is kind of straightforward. you know, you sell arms to governments that repress their population. That's nothing really new. But war against the people has another meaning. And that is, I put it within the framework of global capitalism. You know, we all live, this is sort of the map of intersectionality in a way. We all live in one capitalist system. Doesn't matter where you are, who you are, we're all within this system. It's sort of the common, I don't know if you want to say the common enemy, but it's the common situation we live in. Well, the capitalist system certainly, over the last 50 years, as neoliberalism, this predatory, unregulated neoliberalism grows, is closing down. I mean, the happy face of Ronald McDonald and Hollywood, where capitalism liked to co-opt people and bring them in, is really becoming transformed and has a much more violent and repressive nature today. You know, corporate control of the global economy is much greater than it ever was. We don't have a Teddy Roosevelt anymore to bust monopolies. So you have we've gotten to a point where governments are really working for corporations. And corporations have more resources than most governments. I mean, Jeff Bezos himself has more money than probably any other country except the United States and maybe Britain. You know, and it's true, you know, in the Occupy movement, we used to say we're the 99%. That's pretty much literally the case. Oxfam came out with a report last year that 1% of the world's population owns 50% of the world's resources. And of course, the control the corporations have. At the same time, in a church, how's this for a theological concept? Surplus humanity, which is a term that corporations use. 80% of the world's population lives on less than $10 a day. And they're surplus, they're superfluous, because they'll never be really educated in a meaningful way. They're not going to be skilled workers. And worst of all, they'll never be consumers. You can't buy much on $10 a day. So they're really kind of superfluous to the world's economy. And this, of course, is a picture of the global south, but the global south is more and more coming into the global north. This is from the Occupy Wall Street movement. You know, so our kids, I mean, those of us that are of our age or a little bit younger, and you know, our kids do not have the prospects of achieving our standards of living, in terms of housing, in terms of jobs, in terms of job security, so that the global south is penetrating greatly into the global north. And as that happens, there's more and more resistance on all kinds, from demonstrations to insurgencies to other things. And wars today reflect that. Wars today are resource wars. They're not wars of ideologies and armies and countries and tanks and battles. You know, these are the areas, especially this belt around the equator, where the world's most valuable resources are found. And these happen to be some of the poorest countries in the world. So that, you know, we're in the process of robbing the resources of these countries, you know, turning the people into either surplus humanity or at best cheap labor, and at the same time, of course, destroying the planet. Because unregulated capitalism has that potential of you know, it's creating climate change and everything else we know. So, in this situation then, you have what's called there's a geographer named Derek Gregory in Canada who calls it the everywhere war. I call it a war against the people, or you might call it a securocratic war, because the point of the war against the people is to secure the world for corporations, basically. It's securocratic in the sense of securing. On the one hand, you're securing people against an uprising, and securing going the other way means you're pacifying populations. You're pacifying populations so that they can't resist. That's securitization. So these are securocratic wars in battle space. You know, the militaries today reflect this, their language. You know, you've heard this all the time. Police are today referred to as warriors. Just like soldiers are considered warriors. You don't have soldiers and police so much anymore. You've got these common terms. And battle space is a term that's used more and more, both by militaries and by police forces. Because the idea is there's no more battlefields. That's an old concept. Battle space means you go wherever there's a challenge to the global system or there's a challenge to your government. It could be Brooklyn, you know, a battle space. It could be North Dakota. It could be India, anywhere. Where there's a challenge is battle space. And you have to then develop weaponry and tactics not geared to fighting a war with another country, geared to fighting the people in an everywhere war in battle space. And these are the kinds, and the basic goal is, in the end, to enforce the hegemony of the ruling classes. So, you know, that's in a sense the context in which war against the people and Israel, I'll come back to Israel in a second, are operating. And just in case you don't get it, I mean, this is a Pentagon map of the world. I mean, the world's divided into commands. The North American command, the European command, the African command. In other words, this is the way the Pentagon at least sees the world. So wars are changing. These wars against the people. And it's interesting. We think of war in, you know, patent World War II ways. You know, battles and tanks and wars. Here you have a new F-35 that the Pentagon's produced for $1 trillion. But those kinds of conventional interstate wars are pretty much gone. The last major interstate war that involved two or more powers was the Korean War. And I'm not sure if China in those days was considered a major power. You might go back to World War II, even. Since that time, there's been some localized wars between countries. Iran-Iraq, the Falklands War, which was a cute war, Arab-Israeli wars, you know, Russia and Georgia, so on. But those were all, I mean, some of them were very deadly, but they were localized and didn't have that global impact. So and certainly didn't involve the kinds of weaponry that the Pentagon is producing. So these kinds of wars are pretty much gone. So what we have today are what I call securocratic wars against the people. And there are two major types. You know, one of them is, you know, asymmetric wars. That's a term that you probably heard. That's used fairly common. Asymmetrical warfare. Well, abroad, you know, in the global south in particular, you've got all these kinds of wars. I mean, there's all kinds of terms for them. High-intensity operations. Many wars today are operations and not wars. Partly because Congress, or in different countries, Parliament, you have to declare a war in order for there to be a war. So that needs formal approval. But more so, if you have a war, then the laws of war obtain, and you have to fight by certain rules. You have to have prisoners of war, and they have rights, and you're limited in what you can conquer, what you can do with a conquered territory. There's all kinds of rules of war, rules of engagement. Well, if you're fighting an operation, you're free. You don't have to follow those kinds of wars. So you have Operation Desert Storm. Sometimes we call it the Gulf War, but the official title was an Operation Desert Storm. And that's why the United States could take all these people from Al-Qaeda and other groups and put them in Guantanamo or other places and call them, they called them enemy non-combatants. I mean, they invented it. There is no such thing as a non-combatant that you can hold, because you can't hold a civilian. That's a non-combatant. So they called them enemy. They try to say they're military enemies, but they're not combatants. So we don't have to follow the rules of lawfare. Those are the kinds of things you can do under operations. And of course, since terrorism is your goal now, fighting terrorism and so on, you want that flexibility. You've got limited wars, hybrid wars, small wars, irregular wars. Another nice concept that you hear coming out of Iraq was military operations other than war. See, that free you from international laws. Civil wars, interstate conflicts, of course, but also and police operations. So armies today aren't fighting wars, armies are policing. So you get on the one hand military police, and you get politicized militaries. You know, counterinsurgency, of course, we hear all the time, low-intensity conflicts, dirty wars. I mean, Jeremy Scahill wrote his book about dirty wars, and all kinds of other wars like that. Those are wars against the people. They're wars against enemies, you might say. They don't have armies. They're not wars against countries. And they're wars that have mainly economic reasons. Again, Bolton, Bolton is kind of a loose cannon. And he said, if you remember, like 2 weeks ago or so, 2-3 weeks ago, that the reason the United States sponsored the coup in Venezuela was because of the oil. I mean, he was very upfront about it. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, and that's why we wanted to do this coup. So that, you know, underneath these kinds of operations are the corporate economic interests at play. And that's why they're wars against the people rather than government. And then you've got asymmetrical wars at home. So you've got all of a sudden homeland security. That was never a concept in the United States. Even the concept homeland isn't a concept that was used before 9/11. So now after 9/11 you have homeland security. And you know, it's interesting that the Patriot Act was enacted like within a month of 9/11. You know, so it was in the drawer. So these are all kinds of ways through homeland security that you can begin to inaugurate what we call a security state. A state in which security dominates all other aspects of life. And the Patriot Act paved the way for something like that. And there you have counterterrorism. And think of the metaphors. War on crime, war on drugs, war on immigration. I mean, these are kinds of, you know, the terms that are used of wars. And you get states of permanent emergency. The United States has been in a state of emergency since 9/11. People don't always know that, but it's true. And the police and law enforcement officials have authority now that they never had, that the Americans would not have agreed to before 9/11. France is in a state of permanent emergency. And it's a permanent emergency until they actually amend their constitution to give more power to the Ministry of Security and to the policing. So that this is all a part of it, down to actual policing, militarized policing. I mean, we're all aware of the militarized police in the United States. And of course, the whole prison industry as well. So these are the forms of non-conventional war in global battle space that are fought against the people. Okay. In this kind of a system then, now we come back to this map, Israel plays a particular role. I'm not saying it's the only player by any means. I mean, A lot of other countries know how to repress populations and have technologies of repression and police that are repressive. Israel didn't invent the LAPD, you know. But, as I'm saying, in this war against the people, Israel is particularly well placed as kind of a go-to state because it's been fighting a war against the Palestinian people for the last 125 years. The United States has been busy defending itself against Russia or against the Soviet Union. Europe hasn't fought colonial wars for 70, 80 years now. So the only really major industrial country with sophisticated armaments that is geared towards fighting wars against the people, that has the proper weapons, the proper tactics, the proper structures, I'll talk about that in a minute, is Israel. And so Israel has become this kind of the go-to country for countries all over the world, and this is what I'm trying to say, as the enforcer of global capitalism to some degree. A key tenet of Zionism was always link your wagon to the biggest powers. You know, Theodor Herzl began with the German Kaiser. He went to tried to get the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire involved. After World War I, of course, Zionism linked itself to Britain, the Balfour Declaration and all of that. After 48, it linked itself to France. France is the country that helped Israel develop its nuclear capability. And remember, Israel attacked Egypt together with France and England. After 67, it became the United States. But that might not be the end of the story, because as the United States starts to decline, Israel could easily jump ship to China. In other words, Israel's eggs are in many different baskets. So, you know, and then we begin to understand how Israel gets away with it. This is what I call security politics. How you parlay your military security prowess into political clout. And without the occupation, without the ability to develop these weapons in this kind of a laboratory, you know, Israel would be New Zealand. It'd be some little country, be nice to visit. It certainly wouldn't be the fourth largest nuclear power in the world. It wouldn't be in the neighborhood of NATO. It wouldn't be a military ally of the United States. But it's and so the other question, why didn't Israel give up the occupation, I truly believe is partly because it's such a valuable resource. Not only economically. We have to understand that high tech, all that it comes out of the military. That's the basis of the Israeli economy. But beyond that, it buys you political clout. So Israel's able to sit at the table with the big boys because of its military political clout. And it believes then, you know, because it has its own bottom line, Israel. It wants to keep the occupied territories. It wants to keep the whole country. So Israel believes that by making itself so valuable to the powers of the world that in the end, they might criticize the occupation, but they'll never sanction Israel. And as long as Israel isn't sanctioned, it doesn't care. So you can have the Security Council vote against settlements. Remember, at the last days of the Obama administration, where the United States abstained for the first time, and it passed, but it passed without any sanctions. See, that was the trick. So Israel says, fine, we don't care about that. As a matter of fact, it's even good if you criticize us, because it makes it look like we're the victims and we're being attacked, and it actually helps our PR to be attacked by the UN, because we're more popular than the UN is. But at the same time, that security politics explains Israel's role in the world. Now, in addition to that, and this is what I try to get into in my book, Israel provides a very useful window into this whole world of the military, security, policing, global capitalism, pacification, all these sorts of things. And one reason why I wrote the book is because this is not on the agenda of the left. I mean, I wrote a book, to tell you the truth, I wrote a book about something I know nothing about. I couldn't tell you a grenade from a tank. You know, I'm not interested in it, it's not my field. But I discovered, I mean, first of all, living in Israel, having these questions, I sort of had to begin to follow the threads out. So I began to see that I'm missing something kind of significant here. But beyond that, I discovered that if you take the military and internal security and policing as one unit, one package, which it is today, globally, it's a $2.5 trillion a year industry. And I'm saying to myself, I don't know, I want to change the world, make it a better place, and I don't know anything about a $2.5 trillion a year industry. That's kind of a big blind spot. In addition to that, not knowing weapon systems, not knowing technologies is very dangerous. Most of us in the left, I'll venture to say this, maybe in this room, most of us in the left, liberal left, progressives, whatever we call ourselves, I'm sure, most of us, not all of us, most of us come from the humanities, the social sciences, or the arts. We have no idea what these mad 20-year-old scientists are cooking up in Carnegie Mellon with their trillion-dollar budgets. You know, and at the same time, those kids who are at the cutting edge of these technologies that are deadly, that we don't know about, have never studied ethics, they've never studied history, they've never studied philosophy. They're very happy in their with their toys in their laboratories, producing these kinds of weapon systems with no critical thinking, and we're not talking to each other. So we don't know what they're producing against us, and they don't know why that should be a problem. So that I think looking at Israel, that's very sophisticated in its military security technologies, but is a small country and has to scramble in order to sell its products and so on, becomes a very useful window for getting into some of those technologies and educating us. As this shows, Israel has kind of a pivotal position, even more than the United States. Hybrid warfare, which is another word for war against the people, combines conventional warfare with asymmetrical warfare. So Israel has relations with all the major powers. It's in the NATO neighborhood, and it's, of course, an official ally of the United States. But also, Israel gets all the way down, like I said, to local headmen in countries that the United States has never heard of. Equatorial Guinea, and even drug cartels. In the Civil War in Colombia a few years ago, Israeli mercenaries were training the Colombian army and the paramilitaries and the drug cartels.
Great.
And they were often battles in which you had Israelis involved on all sides. Israel is very sophisticated in its high-tech weapons, but unlike the United States, your weapons are so gadgety and sophisticated that your soldiers don't know how to use them. You've got soldiers from, high school graduates, from poor backgrounds that simply don't know how to use the weapons. And most soldiers in the world are child soldiers, soldiers that don't have much of an education. So what Israel specializes in is simplifying weapon systems, making them field-friendly that anybody can use, like the Uzi is the best example, which is almost 2 pieces of metal. There's nothing you can do to mess up an Uzi.
that keeps the high-tech or the capacity of the weapons intact, but makes them much more usable for soldiers, you know, including American soldiers, actually. And Israel has experience in conventional warfare. It's fought 5 conventional wars with Arab countries, but also, of course, it's got this century experience of warfare amongst the people. So it's in a very interesting pivotal position. Let me just give you some examples of technologies, because these are things we should know. I'm not going to spend too much time, I promise. But just kind of to dip into this world a little bit. Drones. Israel is the world's leader in the manufacture of drones. 60% of the drones that are made and sold are Israeli. And even the American drones are really Israeli drones that have been kind of souped up by the American military. And most drones today are sold to police forces, not the militaries. That's something that should kind of give us pause, especially because more and more drones are being weaponized. Why is Israel? Why Israel? Why are they the leader in drones? Well, it gets us into this war against the people idea. Drone technology has been known from the 1950s and 60s even. The United States wasn't interested in drones because drones are easy to shoot down. What does a drone do? A drone hangs in the sky. That's the whole point of it. It hangs there, it hangs there, it hangs there, and takes pictures. And, you know, it has the ability to patrol in a way human beings can't. It can sit there and be vigilant for days and weeks and months. So that's what it does. That's what a drone basically does. Well, they're easy to shoot down in a conventional war. I mean, it's a sitting duck. So the Americans said, why would we put money into an airplane that you can shoot down? That's stupid. You know? Well, Israel was involved in a war against the people, against Palestinians, against Hezbollah, and so on, even the Egyptians. Well, they didn't have air forces. They didn't have the ability to shoot these airplanes down, like Russia has, or other countries. So the drones, from a point of view of war against the people, are perfect weapons, because they hang there, and they're like, you know, high observation, and now, you know, they're being weaponized more and more, but but you can't reach them. You can't shoot up in the sky, you don't have an air force, and reach them. So the reason Israel got into drones and not the United States is because the kind of warfare it was fighting was war against the people and not wars against an air force. So we can begin to see how these concepts begin to affect weaponry. All right, I won't get into all of this. Walls. That's another Israeli. You know, Israel is the world's expert on walls and you know, securitized borders is a better way to put it. It's not always walls. And the wall that Trump wants to build with Mexico is not I mean, there is a wall. That's the stupid part of it. But the other part of it is this Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli company, and Boeing out of Seattle. Those are the companies that are doing the sensors. It's a smart fence. That's why, and actually the Democrats are arguing that. They're just not being very clear about it. You don't need a wall. You have technologies today that are more effective than a wall. You even have sensors that don't only detect movement, they can trigger automized weaponry. You know, you have autonomous weapon systems. You don't even need soldiers there. I mean, there's all kinds of systems. Partly Israel's developed because Israel does have walls. It has a wall actually for another reason. The wall in Israel is to make a border that you didn't need in the United States. But Israel also specializes in securitized borders. So you've got, in Europe, these are the borders in Europe, most of which have been built by or with Israeli companies. You know, I'll give you one little example. Greece has a left-wing government. the government of Cyprus. It's not even a liberal, it's supposed to be a left-wing government. Well, Cyprus has been to Israel several times in order to buy equipment for securitizing the border against Turkey. Partly against Turkey, but mainly because of the refugees that come through Turkey. So the securitized borders, and look, here are the securitized borders in the rest of the world. So securitized borders become a very important part of global securitization. And what's interesting, I don't have the map, I have it, but I don't have it on here right now. What's interesting is, well, okay, the Pentagon has a map. I have it, I don't have it, I didn't put it on. Has a map of basically the global north and the global south. And what it says is the global north has to firewall itself off against the global south. Because the global south, besides minerals and resources, is the source, according to the Pentagon, of terrorism, of pandemics, and of criminal activities. So the global north has to, if you look at the map of the global north and the borders really conform to that. You can put these borders onto a map, and a lot of them you begin to see how the global north has fortified itself into kind of a fortress against the global south. So these borders have global meaning, not only local meaning in terms of particular conflicts or borders. And again, Israel is one of the world's leaders in smart fences and in autonomous weapon systems. For example, this is a system called Spy and Shoot that's deployed along the border with Gaza. Now, in this particular case, it's an outpost with a gun, and it's manned by soldiers in Tel Aviv, on screens. So they patrol and they can shoot somebody from Tel Aviv. What's interesting, it's very interesting, in most of the drone and remote sites in the Israeli army, they're manned by women and not by men. And I think there's a philosophy behind it. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's a very, women are seen as being able to handle the trauma somehow better than men. I don't quite understand it, but that's interesting. At any rate, this is the system, but Israel is also pioneering autonomous weapon systems. This is the new cutting edge part of warfare. And that is weapons that run by algorithms. You're doing this now with drones. So, for example, you put an algorithm that says the enemy wears a beard, dresses in a white gown, drives white pickup trucks, and is usually in a group of 10 or more people. All right, that's the algorithm, and every time a drone flies over Afghanistan, it attacks a wedding party because it fits the algorithm. So more and more you're getting security systems using algorithms. Today, there's still surveillance systems. And there are cities in the world that are buying Israeli surveillance systems. They're still illegal in terms of weapons. International law does not allow autonomous weapon systems because there's no accountability. But Israel is trying to change that. So that, and there's sort of a rule that if there's a technology, it's going to be applied, no matter what the rules are. So this is another kind of a threat that faces us. And of course, Israel is one of the world's leaders in security because it's got 600 checkpoints in the West Bank. Talk about a direct example of Palestinians as guinea pigs. You've got 600 checkpoints, millions of Palestinians passing every day to school, to shop, to work, and they're all manned by Israeli security companies. No wonder Israel's the world's leader in biometrics and facial recognition. Now those systems are selling to Brazil, for example. Or chips, or different kinds of magnetic devices for surveillance. And no wonder Israel's securing your airports. Israel just signed a contract to secure LAX, and not only LAX. So that here you've got a situation where, you know, despite the American security companies that exist and the technologies, Israel again has a system that's much more efficient, because it really comes out of the the security thing on the ground, rather than simply laboratories from some company in Texas. And Israel has these surveillance systems that are being used more and more. Glasgow just bought this kind of, New Delhi bought this system. I'm not sure yet about American cities. This is a part of a program that's called Safe Cities, and it's really run, the main actor is an Israeli company, you like the name, Nice Systems. That's their name. And they do these kinds of, this is called combat zones at sea. And they're based on all kinds of digital cameras and surveillance equipment. And of course, the idea is that it builds a profile of every single citizen. Everybody, so, you know, if you want to identify somebody, you don't have to go through hours and hours of tapes. You put in certain characteristics, so that everybody, all of us, are a part of these systems. It's bio, you know, these are bio data banks. And everybody has a particular trait. Some people blink, some people walk different, some people have a twitch, some people, I don't know, have a scar. You know, everybody's got something. and these systems pick it up. So if you want to arrest somebody, or if you want to find somebody, these systems will do it really quickly. And what the Nice Systems website says, you should go into some of these websites, because, you know, somebody asked me, how did I write this book? How did I get all this information? Well, this is all on their websites. Why would you produce a system to market if people didn't know about it? Right? So more of this is out than you would imagine. And they'll say that to a security state, Israel is trying to press this idea of a security state. You can have your democracy, but your security is dominant. Democracy is subordinate to security. And that gets into the whole Patriot Act direction and so on. So that in a security state, the greatest threats are states of exception, people doing unusual things, right? People of exception, people who kind of look or behave differently than the norm, and spaces of exception, especially anonymity. Places where the state doesn't know what you're doing, who you're meeting with, what you're talking about. These are all considered threats to the security state, and these are the kinds of threats that these totalizing systems are intended to address. I'm trying to check out if Israel's involved in this. The scariest system, you know, is in China today, where they're experimenting with social credit. And they've taken a whole Chinese city as an example. I have a feeling Israel's involved, I just don't know. And that is that everybody, every citizen, every child gets, let's say, a credit of 10. 10 is the best citizen. All right, you go to school. So what school you go to, what grades you get bumps your credit up or down. You read books from the library. What books you read bumps your credits up or down. The job you have, the people you see, you complain to the city about garbage collection. Well, that could bump you down a notch. In other words, they compose a profile of you and determine, based on your collective social credit, you'll have access or not to certain jobs, to travel, to education. In other words, it's really the most, Orwell couldn't imagine a system that controlling. And I'm writing an article about Israel and China, in that these are the two countries with the highest, well, Israel with the highest level of technology, and China with the most willingness to use it, that don't have any constraints. In this country, I mean, as critical as we are, you do have laws and you have structures. For example, the CIA isn't allowed to talk to the FBI, except according to certain channels. You separate military and police. There's different jurisdictions and so on. You still have, citizens, you have a right to transparency. Certain things, well, that doesn't exist in Israel and China. That are security states. And so they're able to develop and apply these, they're the laboratories that can move these things forward that then will come back into countries like this. Just one example of that. Look at, here's the surveillance industry in the world. There's 528 companies in the surveillance industry. Israel has 27 of them, but the top countries, 510 of the 528 companies are in the global north. So we can begin to get a sense of who's looking at who's following who's controlling who, and so on. Israel specializes in drones, not just big drones, but micro drones. The Technion, which is Israel's Polytechnic University, that's been called the laboratory of the IDF, that is, by the way, a perfect target for BDS. And there's a big campaign in Canada and other countries about the Technion, because it's very involved in your universities in the United States. They developed this kind of thing that's called mimicry. In other words, you develop drones that mimic insects, right? How's this for a weapon? This is a drone, the size of a mosquito. The eyes are cameras, and these are super cameras. I mean, these are like, cameras you can see for miles and heights and pick up things. And this is poisonous, because this can be used, as an assassination weapon to poison someone, not just for surveillance. Well, Israel is the world's leader, or one of the world's leaders, in the military uses of nanotechnology. A nano is the size of a molecule. And you can fill a nanobot, it's called, with, for example, anthrax, which is a disease that has no antidote, or other kinds of diseases. An ampule like this size, can contain enough nano anthrax to kill at least 200,000 people. So this is a weapon, it's a cute little weapon, but this is really a weapon of mass destruction. On almost a molecular, look at this weapon's on this guy's thumb. You can see how tiny it is. Or even weaponizing insects themselves. This becomes a perfect camouflage, and getting down to nano weapons. I'm not going to get into nano weapons tonight. That's a whole lecture. But these are the most dangerous weapons in the world. These are the kinds of weapons the Pentagon is most investing in. The Pentagon, Germany, China, and Israel are the major countries investing in nano weaponry that are tremendously powerful. I'll give you just a tiny example. I don't know enough about it, actually. I have trouble getting information about nano stuff. It's very technical, and it's highly secret, and I've read a number of things. I have an idea, but I can't get into too much detail about it. But for example, I was in Sardinia a few months ago. And in Sardinia, there's an American military base that has a nuclear submarine in it. that very much upsets the Italians. And I was on a panel with a fellow who specializes in nanotechnologies. Italy is one of the world's leaders in the medical applications of nanotechnology, biomedicine. That's where it has a good image. And Israel is one of the leading countries for the military applications of nanotechnology, and they have a joint institute called the Lutz Institute in Florence to combine their technologies. And this guy was doing that kind of research, and he said, you know, everybody's afraid of nuclear weapons, right? The big nuclear weapons scare, and they're dangerous. But he said, you know what? You can take a nanobot, size of a molecule roughly, and you can load it with artificial intelligence and with, let's say, a corrosive material, okay? And send it down to the bay with orders to destroy the nuclear submarine. One nanobot replicates 1 trillion times within 48 hours. So within a day, that one nanobot and its offspring will eat the entire submarine and the nuclear weapons. I mean, that's how powerful these kinds of weapons are. And we don't know anything about them. I'm interested and I don't know anything about them. And these are some of the leading weapons of the military industries. So we don't even have a clue to what the most dangerous weapons are. So there was a science conference, the Global Catastrophe Risks Survey, and they asked the scientists there, what's the probability of human extinction before the year 2100? And they said it's about a 20% likelihood that humanity will be extinct by 2100. And then they broke it down, and look, it's mainly nanotechnologies. 5% probability is from molecular nanotechnology weapons. That was on top for them. And we don't even have that concept in our discourse. Super intelligent artificial intelligence was number 2. Non-nuclear wars. Engineered pandemics, which takes us back to the mosquito. You know? And then down the list you get into nuclear wars. And then you get back into nanotechnology, a nanotechnology accident, natural pandemics, nuclear terrorism. Now, I don't know if climate change was even asked, but climate change isn't even on the list. So these are the main threats that the scientists see to global catastrophe, and they're kinds of technologies we know nothing about. And they're kinds of technologies that Israel specializes in. All right, let me go. Can I take another couple minutes? I know it's getting long.
No, go for it.
All right, because I want to get into the whole issue of pacification and policing on the local level. This is the idea of a security state that Israel is trying to push onto the world. Israel has this concept, and that is you do securitization, like the global war on terror, so that includes everybody. Right? Fought in a domestic battle space, not wars abroad necessarily. And for that, the police are militarized. And then Homeland Security is a way of spanning the military and police. Because the problem in the United States and Western countries is there's a firewall between internal, external, inside, outside, military, civilian, CIA, FBI. And that's very important, you see. So you have, for example, in the United States, you have the military here, you have domestic security and police over here, right? And they're very separate. There's a few cases, where there was direct military intervention by a security force, direct military intervention by an army in a domestic situation. For example, the National Guard in Little Rock, that Eisenhower sent in. New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. The Occupy movement which is very interesting, where the Army played this. You know, there are cases like that, but they're very, very rare. You go back to the 1930s for some of them. And then there are cases in the United States and other countries where police are militarized. SWAT teams are the best example. SWAT teams are militarized police. 30 years ago, there were 4 SWAT teams in the United States. You had Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. Today, 85% of American police forces have SWAT teams, including, you know, southeastern Missouri, north central Idaho. They all have with military weapons. So you have the militarization of the police, but it's still, I mean, as you know, it's very controversial. Jewish for Peace has a program called Deadly Exchange, which is trying to raise public consciousness about that. But this is the system in the United States and other Western countries where you have that division. In Israel, you don't have that division. Israel is the only Western country where there is no division like that. There's a stabbing at the Damascus Gate, everybody's there. The army...
Use the mic, please.
Huh?
The mic.
I'm sorry. There's the army. When there's a stabbing at the Damascus Gate, the army is there, the border police are there, the regular police are there, the Duv Devan and Yassam units are there. Everybody comes. You know, a lot of the, you think about crime programs that you see on TV, there's a murder, and it's often around the FBI comes in and the local police resist there's a fighting between the local police and the FBI over jurisdiction. And then, you know, everybody's fighting about that. That's what you have in this country, and it's a good thing. But Israel is trying to say, to have a real security state, you have to combine your militaries and domestic securities, like we do. These are completely combined units. They don't fit, they fit into both. So that, and in this kind of policing, which is called high-intensity policing, the people are seen as the enemies, or as terrorists, not as citizens to be protected. There's a very fundamental change here. So that's what Israel is trying to bring in. So the police are militarized. Homeland Security becomes that bridge. You see, between the military, that's what's put together, the military and the police. And then you get to a state of exception, or a state of emergency that suspends civil protections, like the Patriot Act, that is much more, that keeps getting renewed. It's not even an issue anymore, but it's renewable, the Patriot Act. That leads to repressive laws and regulations that give more police power to the police. Due process is weakened. And then it gets into this globalized securocratic logic, where everybody, you know, immigrants, just think of Trump's rhetoric. The immigrants, the criminals, the M13, the terrorists, you know, this and that. So the local police, the state of exception, insecurity gets tied into a global system, and then populations that are seen as being, you know, exceptional or poor or threats or restive, you know, become targeted, and then that gets into a kind of securocratic warfare. So the whole thing revolves around the security state and pacification. In the end, the goal is to pacify us, to make us incapable of resisting. And you see that the best example for me is the airport security. There is no need in the 21st century to take your computer out of the bag. There's no need. The Europeans have been trying to change that for years, but the Americans are insistent and won't certify their airports if they don't do it. In Europe, you don't take off your belt. You don't take off your shoes. You know, all those things you don't have to, but, you know, people do it automatically here. You can tell American tourists to Israel because they're the ones that are walking around without shoes. You know, we pacify ourselves. That's kind of the point of this whole thing. And the militarized police. and this change in the structure, which gets into technologies. So, the Israeli weapons industry is one of Israel's companies that produces the Uzi submachine gun. Well, the Uzi is the most popular submachine gun in the world, not only with police and military, but with the criminal gangs, drug cartels. The Uzi is in movies all the time. Now, the Israel weapons industry has just opened a plant in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to supply American law enforcement officers and this huge American gut nut market, right? So what they're doing is they're taking military weapons and reducing them into weapons for law enforcement, or even for civilian use. So the Uzi used to be a small submachine gun that you'd hold like this. Now it's reduced to a pistol. So the next time your local policeman stops you on the street, he could easily be pulling out an Uzi submachine gun from his holster. Here's another example of the Israel weapons industry's weaponry. This is called the X-95 assault rifle. It's used by the Israeli army, but they've reduced it for you see, Israel weapons industry, they've reduced it for law enforcement here. So it's a combined assault rifle, carbine, submachine gun. So you say, well, okay, why carbine? You know what a carbine is? That's the rifle you hunt deer with. Why would you put that together with a submachine gun and an assault rifle? Because in the United States, a carbine can be sold across the counter. You can buy a carbine at Walmart's, you see? So by putting a carbine component into an assault rifle, you make it available to the greater market. So it's really an example of how weapons are being made from military into law enforcement into weaponry for the general public. All right, there's all kinds of non-lethal so-called technologies of repression as well. Israel's developed, for example, skunk, which is a kind of spray that leaves a terrible smell. So first of all, it disperses crowds, but it lasts for weeks. You can't get it off your house, you can't get it off yourself. You can wash and wash and wash and wash, and it's weeks and weeks and weeks before you can get the stench removed. To such a degree that people, sometimes in demonstrations, are put outside of their villages by their own families because they can't stand the stench. And of course, it makes it easy for the police to pick them up later. So these are kinds of technologies. They're not really non-lethal because if you have allergies or there's different kinds of conditions, they can kill you. But they're sold as non-lethal technologies. So in the end, what I'm trying to do with my book is something bigger than just Israel-Palestine. I'm trying to work with the left here, although that's not an easy assignment, to say, if we want to go beyond the hegemony of global capitalism, corporate capitalism, what new system do we have to, you know, I think the Occupy movement, maybe, I don't live here, maybe I'm not correct, seemed to be part of the reason why the Occupy movement collapsed is it had nothing to offer in a way. I mean, it got to a point where you're talking about rent controls, you're talking about this, you're talking about that, but we don't have, on the left, a concept of a new global system. Are we talking about socialism? Are we talking about David Harvey, who's a well-known Marxist, talks about a revolutionary humanism? Life-centric hegemony has been, instead of a profit-centric hegemony has been suggested. What is this new system that we want? And until we can begin to define that, we can fight corporate capitalism, but it's going to win because it has the weaponry and it has the political program. So I'm trying to put all this within a larger political framework, and we'll see how that goes. So that's sort of a view. All the money, all the resources we have come from the people. No corporation is going to fund us, obviously, or government, so
Excuse me.
I'm not going to look.
Excuse me.
So you can
Is that the same as what was at the door when we came in?
Oh, I didn't know. Cheryl, did you take a look at the door? Oh, then maybe we're good.
No, but you do it again.
I'll do it again, but if
Well,
we're
I'll
good,
do it
then we're
again.
good. We only need like.
I just don't want to go twice, I'm sorry, sir.
Yes, okay.
Hi, thank you very much. This has been frightening and illuminating. My attention's been drawn recently to the situation in Western China.
You want to make
yeah.
Yeah, Western China.
Yeah, Western China. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty have declared that to be the largest area of surveillance, social control. This is China controlling the Muslim population just at the border of Kazakhstan. And the New York Times characterized it as the place where artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and all the technology is being put to the finest tuned, large-scale application. I'm wondering whether you've had a chance to take a look at that. I know you said you were interested in the China link. That's the first part of my question. And the other is, we're transferring enormous amounts of technology to Israel. Israel's transferring it to China. Is there some kind of place in there that could create a crack in U.S. policy in terms of arming Israel?
No, that's an important question because that's what is really upsetting the United States, is that Israel has privileged access to American military technology. There's been numerous congressional bills and programs that allow that. Israel has access that Europeans don't have to American military technology. And Israel, I think, is seen as an extension of the military-industrial complex. It's the laboratory. And for example, the Israeli Air Force got the new F-35 stealth bombers before the American Air Force got it. Because it was much better if Israeli pilots tested out, and if they crash, or things don't work, rather than American pilots. I mean, that's part of it. But Israel provides a laboratory in the Middle East much better than some field in Texas, you see. So Israel has privileged access to American technology, and what's true is that Israel is then transferring that technology to other countries, including China. There's a huge argument now between Israel and the United States over technology transfer to China. Israel just had to cancel a big contract with Croatia for old Israeli planes because they contained American technologies. I'll show you how serious it got. During the the Son administration, where you had these Jewish neocons. Paul Wolfowitz was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and Faith, not Daniel, Faith, F-E-I-T-H. What? Douglas Faith.
Yeah.
Was a special undersecretary and so on. Faith, who's a Jewish neocon in the Bush administration, threatened that the United States would cut diplomatic ties with Israel if Israel did not stop transferring American military technology to China. It got to that point where a Jewish neocon was threatening Israel. And in fact, they forced Israel to fire Amos Yaron, who was the Director General of the Ministry of Defense in Israel. And until today, he's not allowed to set foot in the United States. This is, 20 years later. So, it's noticed by the United States. I mean, I think Israel has protection of Congress. But the Pentagon is very, very split. Some in the Pentagon are in favor of Israel and like to work with Israel because of its technological sophistication. But others are really afraid of Israel and are very resentful of the fact that Israel gets... Now, there's another, there's all kinds of things. But for example, other countries that get American military aid have to spend that money in the United States. So it's really a subsidy to the American defense industry.
But Israel only has to spend 70% of the money it gets, and it gets about $4 billion a year in the United States. The other 30% it's allowed to use for the development of its own military industry. So the fact that you have privileged access to cutting-edge American technology and a few $1 billion a year to develop it, plus your own resources, and in a way, you know, you become a competitor in the United States in many places, you know, shows this problematic relationship. You know, one reason why countries prefer Israeli drones to American drones, for example, is the United States sells drones, but it won't sell the black box. You know, the drones contain technologies that it doesn't want other countries to have, and information. So you can buy an American drone, but you don't buy all the technology and information that's in it. Israel will sell you the whole thing. You see, so it's much better to buy an Israeli drone than it is an American drone, just as one example. So, you know, there's all kind, I write about this in detail in my book. And of course, again, Israel-China, I'm writing an article about that now because this is like the polar ends. The two countries that have no constraints whatsoever on the use of these technologies. You know, China with its huge Uyghur, but also this social credit system on its own people, and then Israel with the Palestinians. So, you know, what you're seeing in China and Israel is in a sense the forerunner of what you're liable to see, you know, in the future in this country.
When I look at that map, I see, I think, less relationship to Western Europe, and we were told, I think, that in
one arrow with all these. All these are.
Does Israel have much in the way of sales to Western European democracies?
Yes, Israel. Israel sells. Europe is the largest. One of the largest customers of Israeli military surveillance, more than the United States.
Is it non-military or more like civilian surveillance?
Both. You can't break them down.
Because I used to hear that in Europe, the government is afraid of the people, whereas in the United States, the people are afraid of the government. So I was thinking maybe Israel does not have as much sales to Western European in the area of surveillance technology. Do you have any specific as to that data on surveillance?
I do. First of all, you know, Europe is developing the Watchkeeper drone. That's going to be the European drone, which is owned 51% by Elbit Systems. So it's an Israeli drone that's being Europeanized. And I try to go here a little bit. I couldn't put everything on the map, but I sort of go country by country and talk about, you know, Germany is selling Israel 9 nuclear-capable submarines. You know, Britain has 2 nuclear submarines. Or one or two. China, I think, has 2. Israel's going to have 9 nuclear submarines from Germany, with all the technologies that applies. So you have that. But Israel is trying, I mean, your point is really interesting. Again, Europe is trying to push back against the security state idea. But I'll give you just a cute example of how it's working. You had the bombing in Brussels a couple years ago. Remember the airport in Brussels? And you can look this up. I'm not making this up. The Israeli government response to Belgium wasn't, "We're sorry." It was, "Stop eating chocolate, you Belgians, and join the world." And what Israel said to Belgium was, "You criticize us because of our occupation. You should be imitating us. You know, you've got a few Muslims in some neighborhood in Brussels, and that's upsetting. Or Paris, they said the same thing in Paris. You've got these Muslims in some of your suburbs that are upsetting your country. Look what we've done in Israel. We have a country that's a vibrant democracy for our people, economically flourishing, everybody has personal security, in a country where half the population are terrorists. Imagine if we can do that in Israel, what we could do for you in Belgium. So the Belgians pushed back because it's true. They really are sensitive to their social democracies. But it gets weaker and weaker, especially as you have a populist movement arising in Europe, and you've got this anti-immigrant sentiment and so on. So what I'm saying is, in some ways, the most dangerous export of Israel is this concept of the security state that I think is developing with China. I haven't gotten the hard data yet. That then it's trying to export to Europe, to the United States. The global south is much easier because the global south is already tuned into that kind of relationship. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about NDAs, the role of NDAs in secrecy, like corporate secrecy, because a couple of months ago in September, The Intercept published an article that IBM had been developing, doing a lot of its machine learning, training a lot of video surveillance cameras to interact with artificial intelligence to do facial recognition with like racial profiling options.
That's right.
And then The Intercept, it's not that the article ended, it had ended for its own reasons, but The Intercept discovered this and publicized it. But one of the main reasons it didn't become public was that the New York Police Department and IBM signed what's called a non-disclosure agreement, which is a corporate agreement. Any computer scientist signs it when you get a job. It's just an absolutely standard part of any computer scientist's life is that you sign this. And I wondered how that had affected your work and your research and in general, the ability to understand this stuff.
Right. First of all, as you know, the New York police force has an office in Tel Aviv.
Oh, great.
They have an actual office presence. You have a New York police office in Israel. This is all, a lot of this is true, secret. I'm not privy to everything. But a surprising amount of this information is public. Again, all these technologies are being developed. Some of which are still illegal. But Israel is trying very much to change the rules. It has a campaign called Lawfare, run partly by B'nai B'rith. And Lawfare says terrorists are using human rights against us, against democracies, because they don't follow human rights, and we have to. Human rights conventions, international law. So in a way, we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. So lawfare means let's get rid of all those constraints on our militaries. Basically, what Israel's trying to do is to remove constraints on war against the people. There are two fundamental principles in the wars of engagement. One is called the principle one of the principles is you can't kill or harm non-combatants, civilian populations. The principle of distinction, it's called, which means that, in war you can't attack civilians. Well, Israel is saying, hey, terrorists don't dress in uniforms. A 3-year-old girl could be carrying a bomb. Let's eliminate this combat, non-combatant distinction, which would be pretty dangerous, giving the states the right to attack anybody that they decide is a terrorist. The second principle is called the principle of proportionality, and that is that you're not allowed to attack a population disproportional to the threat. So what Israel is doing in Gaza is completely illegal according to the principle of proportionality. So the lawfare campaign is trying to eliminate these two fundamental principles in international law, and in that way strengthen the state's hand. And once the state's hand, and that goes back to this whole pacification circle, then these technologies that are in the drawer, that are today illegal, once you have more authority as a security state, then you can begin to use these technologies that you can't use today. So, for example, one more, in the United States, you're not supposed to be racial profiling in airports. Racial profiling, ethnic profiling is illegal. I'm sure, it's not, anyway, it is. It's not in Israel. In Israel, on the contrary, Israel says you're stupid. You know who the terrorists are. We have algorithms. We have profiles. We know who the terrorists are. Why are you spending your time with the 80-year-old person in the wheelchair and the 6-year-old kid that's got to stand there and put his hands over his head, and everybody has to do the same thing, when you know that 98% of the people aren't the problem? You know who the problematic people are. So why don't you profile them like we do? You save time, you save energy, and it's more efficient. No one, it's been 30 years now, 40 years since there's been an attack in the Tel Aviv airport. So you see, that's again, that kind of erosion, because it makes sense to people. We want security. We want our government to bring security. So security is a very dangerous term because it's non-problematic. I want security, of course, and I want my government to bring it to me. So whatever the government decides to do, I accept. Now, what I'm saying in my book, I'm trying to get us to use the word pacification, because pacification brings up issues. So, you say, I want security. Okay, fine. Do you want to be pacified? What if we substitute the word pacification for security? Do you want to be pacified? That brings up the question then that security doesn't bring up. Who wants to pacify me? How are they pacifying me? Why are they pacifying me? And all of a sudden these techniques in the airport begin to take on a much more critical political aspect than they do if you simply say security. So, that's why I'm saying even the language that's being used covers a political reality that we have to be aware of. In fact.
Yes, now how are all of these things which you are revealing to us tonight connected with the long-time international Zionist conspiracy for worldwide domination?
No, and I'm very careful, even in my book, to say I don't want to be conspiratorial. I'm very against any kind of conspiracy thinking, because it's simplistic, and if everything falls neatly, it's not true. I mean, I'm not blaming, and I said in my talk somewhere, that Israel's not the only actor. But at the same time, if you can show, now people can reject that idea, but if you can show that in this particular economic and political constellation, Israel does play a particular role because it has certain technologies and it has a certain experience, you can make the case that I'm making without being conspiratorial. And I'm not trying to say Jews control the world. The point's well taken, because, that's the enemy of critical thinking. And left thinking is conspiracy thinking. And it's something we really have to fight all the time.
I was wondering what your sense of the connection of the corporate world is to what you're talking about. Because in fact, corporations now are increasingly international in their, sphere, and you kind of put them in there in the beginning, but then I haven't heard anything about corporations. What is your sense of their role in
Well, corporations work through governments. Corporations want to make money. So they don't want to spend the billions of dollars you need to spend to develop technologies. They let governments and our taxpayer dollars do that. So in other words, the Pentagon, there's a department of the Pentagon called DARPA. Some of you might be aware of DARPA. DARPA, which is the Department of Advanced Research Projects. I can't remember exactly, but look it up on the internet. DARPA's
role, its mission in the Pentagon. It's got like a $4 or $5 billion a year budget, which is very small in the $1 trillion budget of the Pentagon. Its mission is to make science fiction real. That's its mission. And it's developing things, for example, you know, there are cloaks that can make you invisible. In other words, what it's trying to do, one of the programs it has, is to make all the technology you saw in Harry Potter movies real within the next few years, especially for military uses. But then, of course, there's all the... So, using nanotechnologies, the way nano mirrors and so on can reflect light, you can create a cloak that makes you invisible, or a cloak that makes a tank invisible, or a plane invisible. There's nano paint now. The stealth bomber, the F-35 stealth bomber, uses a certain nano paint that deflects light in a certain way and makes it close to invisible. So these technologies all exist, or could exist, and so on. So I think, but you know, it costs a lot of money to develop these things. So a corporation doesn't want to spend $4 billion of its own money in terms of developing some nanomaterials is one of the huge new cutting edge, you know, create materials that soldiers can wear that are paper thin, but that protect them against bullets, against gases, and if a soldier gets wounded, contain materials that make the wound, you know, what's it called, repair the wound, or something like that. All kinds of materials, like smart materials they're called. There's a whole, at MIT, there's a whole institute. It's called the Institute of Soldier Nanotechnology. Look it up. I mean, all these things are there. My point is that these are all funded by governments because, you know, why should industry invest that money when, you know, so governments bring the technology up to the point where then industry can begin to apply it and use it and so on. So I would say that in many ways corporations are determining the agendas of governments. Certainly this idea of global capitalism and repression and all of that, that's coming from corporations. Resource wars, the demand, you know, Halliburton is the best example for Iraq, for, you know, as an example of that. And then governments, you know, do the bidding, basically. I mean, we know the lobbyist system in Congress. Corporations run governments, but governments fund the technologies for the corporations and get them to a point where then it's affordable to develop them.
Left-leaning people have been talking about corporate feudalism for several decades. What you're describing essentially is basically just a continuation of that. Isn't that right? Well, you're saying it's nothing new. You're just saying that the technology has become so much more sophisticated that the corporate feudalism is becoming an increasing reality.
Yeah, I would say two things. The technology is becoming so powerful and so totalizing that it gives armies, military, police forces a power they never had. And second of all, with neoliberalism, you know, neoliberalism is unregulated capitalism. And that was the difference. I mean, Nixon was a Republican capitalist, right? Nixon started the EPA. You know, Nixon was in favor of regulation of capitalism, just even though we saw him as his right-wing. I mean, today he'd be a liberal Democrat, Nixon, I think. You know, so this unregulated capitalism has created a whole new dynamic in which there's no more monopoly busting. Corporations have a free rein to do anything. Trump is very proud of the fact, you know, remember he sat with piles of regulations that he eliminated. And so corporations are unfettered and have access to technologies that are much, much more powerful than anything that existed. So you're right, it's an extension of the system, but in a way that you know, has an impact that has never been felt before. Maybe one last question, I'll let you go. Yes?
Yeah, I just want to say that I've always had the idea that what we needed in the United States was a a huge, and Chomsky has called for this too, a huge campaign to stop all U.S. aid to Israel.
Right.
And it almost seems like, from what you're putting up here, would that make a difference?
No, I think it would make a big difference. A campaign against not only selling weapons to Israel, but selling technologies to Israel, and vice versa. You know, the U.S. campaign has a little bit of a program like that, you know, of at least trying, you know, they're publicizing how much money goes to Israel and trying to say, stop the $34 billion to Israel. But they haven't gone into real detail. And I think there's two levels here. One is by focusing on some of these things and the American involvement, you're able to see how the occupation works, what Israel is doing, but also, again, how it rebounds to the United States. In all my talks, I'm trying to say to people, you know, it's very nice, and it's important, that we have solidarity with the Palestinians for their human rights and their suffering and all that stuff. But it's not a faraway conflict affecting somebody over there. As your Homeland Security and police become Israelized, and you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg here, as they become Israelized, you are becoming Palestinianized. You're becoming Palestinians. Because if Israel's attacking Gaza, it's not attacking the Palestinians, they don't matter. They're the guinea pigs. What Israel is doing is using them, but it's really, the idea is just to outfit your police forces. So you become the end users, the recipients of these technologies. So in a way, it's kind of a reflective BDS, because it's a BDS that focuses on Israel and exposes these powerful things, including that Israel's a powerful country and not a victim, which is also an important message. But it also reflects back in terms of American technologies, or technologies being brought into America. I mean, this whole campaign of JVP, Deadly Exchange, you know, is in a sense a very good kind of a program, because it's highlighting, you know, how Israel is working with the American police. So I think, yes, I think BDS should really begin to go into those areas more, because that's what brings it home. The message being the occupation is here. You know, your companies are complicit, your police forces are complicit, your universities are complicit, and it's endangering your civil liberties. I mean, this isn't only endangering Palestinians, it's coming back to endangering all of us. And I think that's the message that we should try to develop more. So thank you much.
Thank you.
I'll go have a good night's sleep.